Bum, 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 bum.
Welcome to the Good Energy Project with Lou Connor, a surprisingly hopeful show about the invisible economic forces that shape our lives, our homes, and our future on planet Earth.
We put our muffs on.
Yeah.
Get them ready.
Shall we?
How close do I need to be to this?
That sounds good to
Is
me.
it all good?
Kia ora, welcome. Today I've got my lovely friend Charlotte Shade in the studio. Among other things, Charlotte is an artist, co-creator of the amazing up-and-coming band National Sensation, the director of a law firm, Te Aro Law, in Pōneke, and a co-owner of a home in the hills of Korokoro with her partner and 4 other friends. Today I'm excited to talk to Charlotte about her experience of buying a house with friends, doing life together, and bringing up her little son Sherby, surrounded by other adults and 1 other child. It's a different way of being an adult and relating to home. It changes the economic equations of their lives, as well as their social and cultural perspectives. To me, it shows that other pathways are possible that free up time and energy for the important things in life. I've always admired the way Charlotte goes about her life and art. I love the warmly subversive ways she dreams up to challenge outdated norms, like the way women's bodies are sexualized and the assumption that we settle down in a nuclear family unit when we grow up. I first met her about 5 years ago when I was part of an art installation she was creating called the Bare-Breasted Project, where she took more than 100 photographs of breasts. I remember arriving at her house to have my breasts photographed and being made to feel so welcome and comfortable. I also love the fact that she's a lawyer and that she manages to bring this sort of legal perspective to the whole thing. Her more recent creative project is a band that she created with her partner Mike and her housemates, National Sensation. I think their music is great. It's a representation of their life together. The songs Charlotte writes have this wild, witchy rawness, which I love. And her partner Mike writes great sing-along songs with a comic element that reminds me a bit of the Flight of the Conchords. Their 2 housemates play the drums and percussion. It's an unlikely combination that just works. Their music brings people together and celebrates a culture of connection and growth. My focus this year is on home economics, so I'm curious to hear how Charlotte's experience of home and economics has developed over her life. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you, Lou, for having me.
It's so nice to have you here. We're in the studio at Wellington Access Radio and Charlotte is wearing a fabulous sparkly top, which is making me feel quite excited about the conversation.
It's very nice to be here. I've never been here before. What a cool space.
Yeah, it is. It feels quite official to be
Yeah.
having a conversation in the studio. So I wondered if we could start with your childhood. My question that I've started with quite a few people is, do you remember what absorbed your energy and attention when you were a little child?
So I was born in Mohua, Golden Bay, in the Takaka Hospital there, and we lived on a really big, beautiful piece of land that my father had built a house on. And so I spent lots of time outside exploring, I suppose, as you do as a young child. So I think the outdoors came into my life very early.
Did you have siblings?
I did. I had 2 much older siblings who were teenagers when I was born. So they were, I suppose, kind of extra parents for me. And then I had a little brother who came along when I was 4.5.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But for a period there, for the first 4.5 years of my life, I was the only young person in my family and, doing lots of exploring. And music was always a big thing in our household as well. We had a really cool old piano that my dad had found at the dump that had various keys missing and the names of the keys written on them as well. So that's
really?
what I learned to play the piano on.
That's amazing. Yeah. And do you have any moments in particular you remember from when you were a child that you really enjoyed?
Classic moments, I suppose, of birthday parties, really exciting things that happened. I have one particular adventure I remember where I was told to go and collect eggs, or perhaps I wanted to go and collect eggs from the chicken coop, and it was on the other side of the property, so it was quite a way for me. And I decided on the way back that I really needed some sustenance. I needed a snack, so I just broke one of the eggs and ate this raw egg on my way home so that I had
How
a
old
snack.
were you?
I probably would have been maybe somewhere between 4 and 6. Yeah.
How did you find it?
I mean, I just remember being so excited that I was able to, I'd
Sustain
kind of
yourself.
sustain. Yeah, it felt like a real hunting gathering moment.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And my next question is, do you remember coming across money, the idea of money, and how did you feel about that?
I don't remember that from being a very small child, but my mum was very keen on teaching us to look after money and budget really well. So when we were older, we would have a notebook and we would have to write down all our incomings and outgoings, which I think was really valuable to have a kind of appreciation of how to use money. And certainly we were given pocket money, but that was in exchange for doing chores.
Yeah. Do you remember how you felt about money?
I mean, it was exciting because it got you things, didn't it? So you want something and you need money for it. You know, you do the work and then you get the money and then you get the thing. So it was surrounded by excitement, I think.
Yeah. And I remember you saying that your father bought this land in Mohua, Golden Bay, but I think you mentioned that he had dreams of having a community there, but it didn't work out.
Well, it did work out to an extent, but just he didn't stay on the community. So what they did is they bought an enormous piece of land, something like we had 40 hectares, so I think there would have been about 8 parcels of that. They bought the land together, subdivided it, and each built their own house on their piece of land.
And who was the we? Was it a bunch of friends?
It was a bunch of friends that my dad mostly knew from Christchurch. He was teaching down there, and they decided they wanted to move onto the land, live a simpler life. And there was cheap land in Golden Bay at that time. This was in the 70s. Yeah, they all moved up there together and built their own dwellings and had a community between them. And they put in a water system. My dad was trained as an engineer, so he was able to put in a water system for all the different houses. And it was. I think it was a very special project and one that's really inspired me ongoing, even though I didn't grow up for my entirety of my childhood there.
So
we left when I was 6.
Okay. And was that because your parents split up, or did they?
No,
stay?
they're actually still together. It wasn't working for our family unit, I think, to stay there. There were some interpersonal challenges, as you sometimes get in communities. And Golden Bay was small, and I think my mum in particular wanted to raise her second lot of kids, so me and my little brother, in a slightly different way and have different opportunities. So that's why we moved away. And I think it was very sad for my dad, who had this dream and then met my mum, and then it didn't quite work for them as a unit. But it was still a very special project for him, and it's still... it was an important part of his life, and it's an important part of my life.
Is he still connected with that land at all?
So we sold it, and they go over every so often. I often, when I'm over in Mohua, go and visit the house.
Okay.
The owners over the years, they've had me knocking on the door saying, "Hello, my dad built this house. Can I come and have a look, please?" And remind myself, and they're always very open to that, which is lovely.
And so then what was your childhood like in Nelson, was it?
Yeah, so we moved around a lot. So that was one of the, I suppose, the characteristics of my childhood that I credit with lots of the ways that I've turned out. So I went to 5 different primary schools. After Golden Bay, we moved to Tauranga, where my mum studied floristry. She wanted to be a florist, and she's very green-fingered, and so that was something that she'd always wanted to do. We moved back to the Nelson area, and I went to school in Richmond. We went overseas for a bit. We came back to Nelson and then settled in kind of Nelson Central. And so moving around, I think I was blessed with an ability to connect quite quickly with lots of people, but it did mean that we as a family didn't have a really solid support system in any of those places. It was probably a little bit isolating in terms of the adults that we came into contact with. And growing up, I always thought, man, I really want to have a home where I have lots of people that I know and love coming in and out, have the familiarity of that. And I think that's in reaction to what we had, which was quite a kind of isolated home family unit.
With this earlier years of sort of a start on the land with other people around.
Yeah. So something more like my earlier years, even though I obviously don't have a great memory of. Yeah. I don't have a firm memory of them because I was little.
Yeah.
But they live in me, and I've obviously enhanced that memory over the years by thinking about it more and building on it. And going back to Mohua, which I do really regularly.
Oh, yeah.
Feels like a spiritual home for me.
Oh, yeah, right. I think you've talked in the past about having a Christian background in some way. How did that come into your life?
Yeah, so my mum became a Christian before I was born, and that was something she was very passionate about, and she wanted to bring us up in that space. And so we went to church from the very beginning. And there was an element of community in the church always, which was, I think, probably really important for us, given that we didn't have so much in our home environment. But growing up as a Christian for me was important, I think, because it was the way that I understood, I suppose, questions like how to be a good person, how to live a good life, what your values are.
Like kind of looking after people. Or...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, compassion is always the first word that comes to mind. That's kind of one of my core values, ways of living. And yeah, just thinking about lots of questions about how we have relationships, how we interact with other people, and the I suppose the socialist Jesus that I was keen on. Yeah. The revolutionary anti-system Jesus.
So was that sort of part of your
important?
Almost, I don't know if it would be a political awakening, but kind of realizing what's wrong with the world and...
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, the reality of growing up in a religion that's not the main kind of way of thinking about the world, as in New Zealand, we're mostly secular now. So I grew up with this feeling of there being something like very terribly wrong in the world because I was, part of this group of people who felt like they believed the only one right way to go about living in the world. Yeah. So there's definitely an us and them feeling to it. But it was very easy. So I'm not a Christian anymore, and I haven't been since my early 20s for a variety of reasons. But I've really held on to lots of the values, and I think it was quite easy to translate the feeling of serious injustice, in the world, and people not looking after each other, people not living in a way that kind of supports the community and the connection that I believe that we should have, and that a religion like Christianity is, they're wanting everyone to be connected. But obviously there's a dogma to that. It's you connect in this particular way. Yeah.
But there was some gold in there that
absolutely, so much gold.
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for that part of my upbringing. It had some impacts that have been challenging as well, but I think ultimately I'm really, really stoked that I got that insight into, one way of living a life. Yeah.
And so how did this idea of co-buying a home come about?
I was reflecting on this, and I actually don't know where the idea came from. I mean, it was me that kind of talked to everyone about it initially, and I was trying to remember, was there some model that I'd seen, or I think it was really just wanting to make sure that we weren't... I think the idea came from wanting to make sure that we weren't slaves to the system, really.
Yeah.
And
what gave you the idea that you might become slaves, or that you could be?
well, I mean, I think when you've been renting for a decade or more and you see how much money you're giving to landlords, and if you tally that up over that time, you think, well, if I'd been in a position to buy a house when I was 20, I'd own one by now, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
That's a bit strange that I don't own anything. And yeah, it felt like a no-brainer for us to, if we were going to continue living together anyway, live in a way where we were feeding into our own future rather than someone else's pockets.
I feel like one of the key things in your situation is that you had this great bunch of people that were already enjoying living together. That seems quite special to me.
Yeah, I think that before I considered whether co-ownership was viable, a long time before that, I'd be really interested in living in communities. So almost all of the flats that I lived in through my 20s were quite communal. I never lived in a flat where you kind of, you do your own thing, you go into your bedroom and hide away and cook your own meals and scurry out. I'd always lived in places where people were there to connect and support each other. So I felt very, I suppose, converted to that way of living. And didn't want to give it up. I just felt like it was working so well. It's so efficient.
In terms of money?
In terms of money and energy, and I know you're
I'm interested
you're
in
really
energy,
interested in energy, hey? So it obviously there are challenges, and we can talk about those. But, it just made a lot of sense. And we had this group, and we'd lived together for a few years, and we felt really close and ready to take another step. We needed to move into a bigger home anyway because people had acquired partners. And it wasn't quite big enough, the rental that we had, so we thought, well, why not buy a place?
Yeah. And so can you tell me about the process?
Yeah. So we initially had to obviously talk about practical things like where and what we wanted, what we needed. And that process was everyone, I suppose, thinking really hard about what was non-negotiable for them, I suppose, in a home. And we had a very short list in the end of non-negotiables.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. So
do you remember what they were?
Yeah, I think a home being dry, warm, and having natural light.
Yeah,
those were three really important things.
Anything about the location?
We wanted to stay within the Wellington area, and ideally we wanted to stay where we were, which was on the south coast, or in the kind of in that general vicinity. But we quickly found when we started looking for places that they were few and far between, or were at a price for the size that we needed. They were at a price that we could afford, but we didn't necessarily want to, fork out an enormous amount of money if we could actually live with a little bit less space, a little bit further away from the city.
Yeah.
So once we got our non-negotiables, we kind of worked to that, looked for houses. And
I read your housemate Rupert's articles about the process, and they're really great. They're all on Medium.
Yes, that's right. And that's
Rupert's Nook.
Yeah, definitely check those out if you're interested in co-ownership, because there's so many lessons that we learnt along the way there. And obviously our co-ownership agreement is also open sourced there, which is I think
I'd love
really
to talk
good.
about that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that agreement?
Yeah, for sure. So the agreement we started to develop it a little bit before we purchased the home, but mostly we developed it afterwards because it was quite a lot of work to go through all these kind of like quite complicated legal concepts and work out how to ensure that everything was going to be fair moving forward. Yeah, it took us quite a long time to do that, and it was not something we were able to prioritise in the excitement of actually purchasing a home.
Right. Yeah.
But
Good that you did prioritise it.
Eventually.
Yeah.
No,
What kind of things are in it?
So the main purpose of a co-ownership agreement is to ensure that people, I suppose this is the riskiest part of co-ownership, is because you are on a mortgage together. So the way that the banks do the mortgages is they give you one
big mortgage,
big old mortgage
that you share.
So there were 8 of us buying a house together, and so they were able to give us separate loans within that mortgage, but we were all what's called jointly and severably liable. So that means that any one person could be pounced on by the bank for the whole lot if the bank decided that's what
you're really, really committing to each other.
So you're really committing to each other, and there's lots of trust involved. But what the co-ownership agreement did is it made it clear that you only had liability for your chunk of the mortgage. And if the bank came after you for anyone else's share, they would then owe you that money.
Yeah, right.
So that's set out in there. And the other really important part of the agreement is exit strategies. So one of the big lessons that we've learned is that to be able to have everyone freely choosing every day, as you do in a relationship, to be living in a place with other people, you have to make sure that it's easy enough to also leave. You're not trapped there, because otherwise you get this feeling of like, oh shit, I can't go anywhere else, I'm stuck. Yeah. And so the co-ownership agreement sets out exactly what will happen if one party or a couple want to leave. It sets out what happens if a couple breaks up. And there are a variety of steps that you follow if any of those things happen. So those are probably the two main parts of it, but there's lots of other stuff as well.
So you've been there for 4 years now?
Yeah.
4.5 years?
Yeah, 4.5.
And have you leaned on that agreement in that time?
We have. So about a couple of years ago, one of the couples that we originally bought with said that they were going to sell their share. They were going to go and do something different. So we did have to use the agreement at that stage, and it was pretty fit for purpose. There were a couple of things that we learned, which we then added in. But, we were incredibly grateful to have it, because at that stage, it's essentially like a breakup. Because you have quite, you're close. You're very close, and you're kind of just very entangled. And so, even if it's an amicable breakup, there's still quite a lot of emotion involved. And to have a nice, clear document setting out what happens was really
so helpful.
Really helpful,
Yeah. Is there anything else that you've learned about the process that you think other people might be really keen to hear about?
What have we learned? We've learnt one of the things that we think is really important is to know the people that you're living with as well as you can. Obviously, you can never know someone fully. But living with people before you own with them is something that we would really recommend. Just because it's very hard to, just like in any flatting situation, like it's hard to know whether someone that you get on with in the outside world as friends is going to be compatible with you in your living environment.
Such a good point.
Yeah, so understanding that as much as possible. And we've had to do an enormous amount of work on our communication, and we've learnt lots through conflicts throughout the process. And we've all improved the way that we I suppose, reflect on what we need in a living situation and then express that to the group.
So being aware of your needs and being able to communicate them.
Yeah, that's right.
That feels quite huge.
Oh, it's so massive, and it's probably, it's a life lesson for anyone, regardless of whether they're in a co-living situation.
But I feel like something I've talked to some other guests about was how our system has sort of isolated us into quite small units, and we've lost the skills and abilities to form those close connections.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're really working at that very fundamental level of how do we build relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. That feels like one of the most important parts about co-living is that you're creating long-term relationships that are quite resilient, I think, hopefully. And, the dream is that we will continue our relationships, even if we don't necessarily live with everyone forever, that we will continue those relationships for a long time, potentially forever.
Yeah.
And that our children will benefit from that.
Oh, yeah. Can you talk about having a baby?
Yeah. So Mike and I have an 18-month-old wee baby called Shu, and he has been the second child in the house, so Nola was number one. For Mike and I, we essentially had a blow-by-blow tutorial on how to be a parent because we were with Nola from the time she came home from the hospital, and we saw a phenomenal example from her parents of how to parent, and learnt lots about how we related to children and formed a real bond with her, which I think is really helpful when you're living with a kid because they can be quite annoying otherwise.
If you don't have a bond
with them, because they're up in your space, and they obviously we still maintain some privacy. You're allowed to go to your room and not have Nola hanging around. But kids are big personalities on the whole.
I read Rupert's article about bringing up Nola in the shared flat or shared home.
Yeah.
I remember him saying that he was nervous that having a child would just annoy everyone, and he was so delighted that everyone formed these bonds with Nola.
Yeah, and I think it's you can't really help but form a bond because they're just so lovely, even when they're hard work.
Yeah.
But so we then went on to have Sherby, and Sherby has, I think, benefited hugely from having, we call them aunties and uncles around, and having Nola around as well. As a quasi-sibling, they don't spend as much time together as regular siblings would because they're not together when they wake up or spend all day together because they go out and do different things with us and Nola's parents. But they do still have a really special relationship, which is very cool to see.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
And what I'm quite interested in the energy input that doing something like this takes and what you get out of it.
So the input, I think, the main input is the relational stuff. Each relationship you have with someone in a home like this, or this is our experience of it, is that it's kind of like being in a partnership with them, obviously without the intimacy. It's like a platonic...
Like a 6-person
partnership.
Or maybe an eight person with the children.
Yeah. So you have to work out how to feel really easeful and comfortable around these people. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to be comfortable in your own home, which is not sustainable. So that's one of the biggest pieces of work, I think, is really getting to know people and feeling that level of comfort. But I think that once you achieve that, then it's just like living in a family, the ongoing input, I suppose, is dealing with a bit of kind of chaos and there's lots of noise a lot of the time and lots of stimulation, and it's not necessarily a quiet place to live, and so you have to monitor your own needs then and make sure that you're getting enough of your own time and whatnot. But otherwise the input feels quite minimal for what you actually get out of it, which is all the practical things. We share our cooking, so
Yeah.
I only have to cook once a week. Bloody fantastic.
Yeah, that is good.
We share the housework, we share all the costs of utilities, electricity, internet, etc. We obviously all have much smaller mortgages than we would if we were to live in a house by ourselves, which frees us up for lots of other things.
You were saying that you work, is it 4 days a week, and Mike is not working at the moment?
Yeah, so Mike is home daddy at the moment,
Yeah.
and I work 4 days a week, yeah.
And that you can pay the mortgage and all the expenses
with
with
that.
that.
And it's just, we're pinching ourselves that, we feel so privileged to be able to do that. And yeah, it just frees you up to do so much more. Like, we can make sure that we spend lots of time with Shubi. We can make sure that we spend lots of time looking after the needs of other people in the home as well. So the support system feels really strong. And it also means that Mike and I are not each other's only support as well. Yeah. Mike can have support and friendship from all of these other people. And especially as home daddy, he's, if he was in a traditional nuclear family home, he'd be
on his own
at home every day with Shubi. They'll go out and do activities, but then they come home and they're on their own.
Yeah.
Whereas he is there with friends. All the time, pretty much. Because we also have, as well as Mike and I having this lush, flexible schedule, other people in the house have that as well. So none of us are really working full time. We all are able to work flexible, not quite full-time jobs.
And how do you think that affects your ability to sort of give in a wider sense, like to the world, to the wider community?
Well, it feels like I've got a lot more energy for everything else. And I mean, the example of us being able to pursue creative things is a really good example of that. We have all this time. Mike and I call ourselves time millionaires.
Oh my God, that's a dream.
It is such a dream.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to make music together in our spare time, because we have lots of it, and then, share that with the world.
And I love your band, and I feel like music is really important. Watching your band and listening, it feels like you've got 4 quite different people there, but it's like all these different influences coming together in quite a cohesive whole.
I'm glad it feels cohesive.
Yeah.
It feels chaotic for us a lot of the time.
Does it? Yeah. But I mean, can you say what you love about music and why that feels important to you?
Yeah. Well, if you think about why we're alive, if you come back to real basics, and obviously there's no one reason why we're all alive. It's a philosophical question with endless answers. But for me, it's, we're here to enjoy ourselves to the extent that we can without impacting others or the planet too much, So we're here to enjoy ourselves in a respectful way, I suppose. And music and art and creativity happens to be something that I really love. It makes me really, really happy. And on the other hand, I have this very serious job as a lawyer that fulfills me a lot. And I think it's really important, because I think that there's a lot of good work that needs to be done in the world. And
in terms of law?
Yeah, in terms of social justice issues generally. And I'm just a teeny little...
Do you work on those kind of issues in your law work?
Yeah, well, because of the area that we're practicing in, which is mainly criminal defence and family work for legally aided people, so people who can't afford to pay privately for lawyers. Yeah, we're looking a lot at, I suppose, the underlying causes of why people get into really difficult situations with their family or with the criminal justice system, and trying to assist them to address those issues. So it does feel, it feels like a little way to make the world a better place. But I've got this really serious side to my life, which I think is really important, because we don't have a perfect world, and I have a responsibility to do something good. But then on the other side, I do this thing which I find really, it's quite hedonistic playing music because it's just so entirely enjoyable and a very spiritual experience for me.
Yeah.
You know, I feel very much myself when I'm playing music.
Where do the songs come from that you write?
Yeah. What does that question even mean? Where does the music come from?
In you, or like,
Yeah.
well, what's the feeling that?
Yeah. I think for me, the music that I connect the most with, music has lots of different reasons and rhymes, but for me, the music that I connect with mostly is music that makes me feel lots and feel a kind of depth of feeling that allows me to gain perspective on my life and remember that we're only here for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
We're just these tiny little drops wafting through the seas of time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of mixed metaphors there. It kind of brings me back to that feeling, that grounded feeling of, here I am on this earth, what am I doing? Does it matter? Like, yes, absolutely it matters heaps, and also it doesn't matter at all. Like, that somewhere in between.
It's quite
that.
epic.
Yeah.
I have this, when I listen to your music, it's a bit like standing on a mountaintop or something with a wild wind blowing and looking out.
That is exactly what I want.
Bellina Bay, where the bowhead whales play. I watched from a distance all of the misfits. I watched them go round and around and around and around they go. They go round.
That was such a good place to go. I've just drifted out
That's
into...
all right, we can do some drifting. Don't you love being able to cut things in post?
Yeah, I might not even cut it. It's quite nice. Yeah, I suppose for me this whole project has been a process of making visible these invisible, very sneaky and powerful forces that are at work in the world. And yeah, I've been learning about the birth of capitalism lately and what life was like before that, when work was something that we did to meet our needs, but life was about more than that, and it was about connecting with the earth and with each other and with God. And it seems that you've discovered a way to trick that system a little bit to free up some time and some energy for what feels important in life.
Yeah, I mean, if living smaller and with less impact is what we're aiming for, which for me it is, then we do need more time to be able to, mend things instead of buying a new one for cheap. Or grow some food instead of buying the stuff that you get at the supermarket, which is ultimately going to cost you less. You know, that even if they're expensive, it's going to cost you more in time and energy to grow food in your own garden, depending on the scale, etc., of course, and what you're growing. Yeah. But if we want to reduce our impact, then we do need to have that time.
Yeah. And also mending relationships.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Like something I've been thinking about a lot is healing and the way that we've become so severed from each other and from the earth. And I feel it in myself. Like we were talking about music, connecting with feelings before, and connecting with our feelings and healing feels so important as a first step.
And it can have so many flow-on effects, I think. You know, the things that make us unwell, if you think about epidemics of physical and mental health issues that we're seeing, I genuinely think that connection is the answer to lots of those. And having more time is the way to get more connected. So, yeah, you know, we... very simplistically, we kind of make ourselves sick by going out and pursuing all these capitalist ideals, very busy jobs, lots of stuff.
Yeah.
Must work hard so I can buy lots of stuff.
Yeah,
And not really have much time for the people around me because I'm too busy working to buy stuff.
Yeah.
And then we find ourselves not very well. And then we need to go and spend money on getting well, don't we? We go and spend a whole lot of money on therapeutic interventions and lots of things. And obviously they all have their place. But I do wonder whether if we were just better connected to the people around us and to the earth, we might actually be better.
Yeah.
We might not be as unwell as we are.
Yeah, I think so. I'm wondering if we can explore dreams and longings for the future. From where you stand now and from having created this life that has a bit more time and energy available, what do you dream or long for the future?
I think one of the things that I have realised in a few of the projects that I've been part of now, and the law firm that I'm working in is one of these as well, you can just do things quite differently if you want. You just have to do it. And it's not necessarily going to be plain sailing, but when is life ever plain sailing? You know?
Yeah, it's hard. So.
There's going to be difficult things. So why not do something different and give it a go? I think even... if in our co-living arrangement, even if it stopped now and we all went off and lived in nuclear families for the rest of our lives, even the period of time that we've had co-living together would be, I would never
You'd never lose that.
Never lose it, yeah. So I suppose my hope is that people can actually take the step and do something different because especially in New Zealand where we have so much going for us. Like we're so incredibly lucky to live in this beautiful country. We have lots of arable land. We've got lots of water. We've got a fairly permissive legal system in terms of doing things slightly differently. We can change the way that we do things, you know.
So what do you think it could look like?
Well, I mean, I would like to see everybody have a home.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd like to see everybody have a roof over their head, and I would like to see people owning their own homes and not having this, quite frankly, very scary widening divide between the rich and the poor in New Zealand, and far too many homes being owned by a very small percentage of the population. And I would like to see people treating the earth better.
Yeah.
And again, I think in New Zealand we can do that. You know, we can do more growing of our own food in a way that supports the earth rather than takes away from it. We've got it all here. We just have to do it, hey?
Do you have a sense of what needs to be done to make that possible? Or what's in our way?
Well, except for the current government.
You can talk about that.
No. Yeah, I mean, we don't need to talk about politics. But if you're asking about the legal things that would make something like co-housing easier, there are certainly things that we could change to allow it to be easier for people to buy together and for the inevitable to happen, which is that people will then sell their shares and other people will buy, and you know, to have that kind of fluidity in these communities.
A bit more like flatting, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think the banks are onto it. They are progressing their systems in a way which is making it easier.
And that's all changed in the last 4 years?
Yeah, it really has. So when we first decided to do this, we went to ask all the banks for mortgages, you know, hey, Kiwi Bank, Cooperative, can we have a morttage from you for this? And they said, no way, what is that? Computer says no. Like it was absolutely not possible. Yeah. And now it's different. They can facilitate those mortgages, which is
that's
really
good.
Great.
Yeah. So are there any other changes that would help? Like any other obstacles that you think
Well, one of the issues with the mortgage process is that every time that you change the ownership structure, so one person sells and another person buys in, the whole group has to get a brand new mortgage. And that obviously requires all of the groups to submit their financial information. And for instance, if you have someone who's not working anymore, maybe they've become a parent or they've lost their job or they're in between jobs, then you suddenly have a complicated situation where even though they can technically continue to pay the mortgage that they were paying, they're not allowed to get a new one.
The sort of people that banks will approve need to have a full-time job.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I've definitely been thinking about alternatives. For instance, having a company or a trust owning the property, and then people can kind of buy in and sell without the actual ownership structure changing. But I've got quite a lot more thinking to do on that. If there's anyone out there that wants to have a conversation with me about that,
Cool.
and how that might work, please get in touch. And then, of course, we've got planning rules as well that make it difficult to have multiple dwellings on a piece of land. That's also been relaxed quite a lot in the last few years since our housing crisis. You can build bigger outbuildings without consent.
Because one of the dreams that I've talked to a lot of people about is to have a kind of piece of land for the central community centre and then little, like maybe tiny houses or little dwellings that different groups can live in.
Yeah.
And is that legal? Do you know about the...
Well, it will depend where you are. So it depends. Each region has their own regional plan and decides who can live where and how many houses you can build on a given piece of property. And one of the issues, obviously, is that if you want land, you have to go a bit rural, and there are rural restrictions. You can't just buy a field and build 6 houses on it. But I think there is some movement in that space. One of the things that I have talked to other co-owners about who have perhaps developed a property is as soon as you're building a few houses on a piece of land, you get treated as a developer and the fees are just absolutely exorbitant. So that's probably something that if that changed, it would help people to be able to more easily build their homes as opposed to being a big corporate developer who's making tons of money. Yeah. That would help. But ultimately, what the most important thing is that people have these strong relationships and they're able to communicate and resolve disputes. I think the conflict resolution skills is like the absolute necessity.
Do you have any tips on that?
Well, I mean, you kind of need to, it's work. Like you have to sit down and do the work on yourself to start with. So working out what your triggers are, what you need, how you resolve conflicts, how could you use the skills that you've got, and how could you develop your skills. I think nonviolent communication has a lot of good stuff. Yeah. And at least being like well-versed in that is really important. And obviously managing your emotions, managing your triggers, making sure that you, in conflict situations, don't make things worse rather than better.
It's a big one.
Learning how to talk about things. You know, for some people that's the first barrier, just actually getting the words out of their mouth to say, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I need. Or this is what I think I need. It might be different tomorrow, but let me just say it now and then we can talk about it again tomorrow. So I think that if people put lots of work and effort into that stuff, then a lot of the other problems would maybe just sort themselves out.
Yeah. If you can relate together and solve problems, then you can probably face the challenges.
That's right.
Do you have any dreams for your own home in the future?
Well, we will outgrow our home inevitably because people keep having babies. And I think the intention is that people will continue to have more babies. And we could obviously squeeze into our home, you know. Lots of people in certain cultures live really packed into a home. I'm personally not opposed to that. I love a really busy space. But obviously everybody needs to feel like their home is still a sanctuary and a place that they can go to. So I think for our group, what we will need to do is find a place that is more spacious.
Yeah.
So that really means more rooms so that everybody's got a place to go, maybe more hobby spaces. The dream for us is a big piece of land where we can also grow lots of food and keep animals and, live in our little utopia that we've created.
And then Sherby can go and get an egg and eat it.
Yes, he can.
That would be nice.
Oh, it would be lovely.
One more question is, so I've been reading a little bit about traditional kāinga and marae communities. Something I've been inspired about is the way that in times of crisis and disasters like the floods, those marae communities are able to support the wider community. And I think it's something about being a place of manaakitanga and of relationships and community that they're able to be there in times of trouble. And it just becomes clear to me that as Pakeha and Tau iwi, we don't have those kind of structures in place or those traditions that mean that we can respond in that immediate way to whatever happens. And I just wondered if you have any ideas or imaginations of what we could grow into to be able to be good treaty partners, but also for our homes to start to be more connected and more able to offer that kind of hospitality and manaakitanga.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you really value connection, then for groups like ours, it does extend beyond your home already. So, we're pretty classic, meet the neighbours, make sure you say hello to everyone, stop for a chat kind of people. Yeah. And those little things do build connection. They do create a supportive kind of network of people, which does help in tougher times. For instance, we've hosted a couple of street parties on our street, which are really just an opportunity for everyone to get together and know who lives beside them. Because so often people don't actually know who live in those houses. They never see them.
And do people think you're strange for living together?
I think that initially there was a lot of scepticism about what we were up to. One of the neighbours came over at one stage and said, Are you a religious cult? And I said, no. we're just quite regular friends.
Okay.
But it's understandable that people would think that we're a bit unusual because it is unusual what we're doing. But I think modelling connection to the wider community is a way to assist people to have those support networks. So I think even just the fact that we know most of the people on our street now, so we're number 38 and we're the last house on the street, we know pretty much who lives in every house,
which is
cool. very, very special.
Yeah.
That makes us more resilient, I think, if we were to have other crises in the future.
Thinking about energy, I'm noticing that you being in that home together has released some energy, and then each time you get a bit more energy, you can connect a bit wider, and now you know everyone on your street.
Yeah.
And I like that sense of that's how we form these networks and support structures, not in a sort of top-down, we're going to create this entity or this organisation, but more like slowly practicing connection and releasing more energy so that they kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. It feels really right. I get an enormous amount of peace from the way that we are living.
Oh, that's nice. I have one last question.
Sure.
Which is, if you can imagine that you're 80 years old and sitting on a favourite chair with all your loved ones around you, looking back at your life, what do you feel most proud of?
Probably not necessarily living as a a kind and compassionate person and all the other things that I want to have my life marked by, generosity and hospitality. But ultimately, I would really like to see some ongoing change from the models that I've been part of creating. So I think that if there were any people that would be able to say, yeah, I saw that thing that she did and it was inspiring, and I went and did something similar and it worked for me, I'd really love that to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you say about it is possible to do things differently.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yay, thank you.
You're so welcome. What a pleasure.
Yeah. Let's call that a wrap.
A wrap.
Are you going to do a wrap?
No, I'm not a rapper.
That was the Good Energy Project. If you'd like to access more interviews, writing and illustrations, you can find them at thegoodenergyproject.substack.com. The shows are also available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And thanks to Charlotte Shade and National Sensation for this beautiful music.